There is a conversation happening right now in oncology research circles that has not yet made it into most doctors' offices, and if you are over 50, the information I am about to share with you may be the most important thing you hear this year. I want to be honest with you from the start. I am not going to give you a feel-good list of vague health tips. What I am going to do is walk you through the exact biological changes happening inside your body right now, the ones that silently shift your cancer risk, and then tell you precisely what the most current peer-reviewed science says you can do about them. My name is Dr. Caroline Marsh. I have spent 24 years as a clinical oncologist and preventive cancer researcher, and in that time I have sat across from thousands of patients who all said the same thing after a diagnosis. Nobody ever told me. That ends today. Before I go any further, I want to ask you one thing. Drop your age in the comments right now. Just a number. Because the research I am about to share applies differently depending on where you are in your 50s, 60s, or 70s, and I want to make sure I am speaking directly to your situation. The truth that most people over 50 have never been told is this: cancer does not begin the day you get diagnosed. It begins years, sometimes decades earlier, in a sequence of quiet biological shifts that most people never feel, never see, and never address, because no one ever explained them. But here is what is extraordinary. Every single one of those shifts is measurable, and most of them are reversible. A 2023 analysis published in Nature Reviews Cancer examined data from over 400,000 adults across 18 countries and identified what researchers called a convergence point, a specific cluster of biological markers that appeared in the majority of patients between 7 and 12 years before a cancer diagnosis. 7 to 12 years. That is not a death sentence. That is a window, and I am going to help you understand exactly how to use it. Let us start with something that almost no one is talking about, and it is happening in your gut right now. The human gut contains approximately 38 trillion microbial organisms. That number is not there for dramatic effect. It is there because those organisms are not passengers. They are active participants in your immune function, your hormonal regulation, and your DNA repair pathways. A landmark 2022 study from the Wellcome Sanger Institute in the UK, published in Cell, sequenced the gut microbiomes of over 12,000 adults aged 50 to 80 and found something that stopped researchers in their tracks. Adults with low microbial diversity in their gut had a 52% higher production of a compound called secondary bile acids, which are directly linked to colorectal and liver cancer cell proliferation. But here is what made this study different from everything that came before it. The researchers identified that microbial diversity was not simply a reflection of diet. It was also a predictor of inflammation-driven DNA damage in non-gastrointestinal tissues, including breast, prostate, and lung. Your gut is not just digesting your food, it is either protecting your entire body or quietly inflaming it, depending on what you feed it and how you live. The practical application of this is not complicated, but it is specific. Fermented foods, not supplements, not powders, but actual fermented foods, kimchi, plain kefir, unsweetened yogurt with live cultures, miso, and sauerkraut, have been shown in a 2021 randomized controlled trial from Stanford University to increase microbial diversity markers in adults over 50 by up to 19% within just 10 weeks. That diversity directly corresponds to reduced secondary bile acid production and measurably lower gut-associated inflammatory markers. 1 serving per day. That is the threshold the Stanford data points to. I had a patient, I will call him Thomas, 64 years old, a retired contractor from the Pacific Northwest, who came to me with a pattern of colonoscopy findings that his previous gastroenterologist described as heading in the wrong direction. Thomas ate what he called a clean diet, grilled meats, salads, not much junk food. But he had never once in his adult life intentionally consumed a fermented food. His gut microbiome panel, which I run as part of my preventive oncology intake, showed a diversity score in the bottom 14th percentile for his age group. Over 8 months, with 1 daily serving of fermented food and a gradual increase in fiber variety, his diversity score moved to the 61st percentile. His follow-up scope was described by his gastroenterologist as a dramatic improvement. Now I need you to stay with me, because what comes next is the habit that most of my long-term cancer-free patients share. And it is the one that surprises people most because it has nothing to do with food, exercise, or sleep. It has to do with light, specifically the light hitting your eyes in the first 30 minutes after you wake up. This is not alternative medicine. This is photobiology, and it is one of the fastest moving areas of cancer-adjacent research right now. Your circadian rhythm, the internal 24-hour clock that governs virtually every hormonal and cellular process in your body, is reset each morning by a signal called the cortisol awakening response. This response is triggered and calibrated by exposure to natural outdoor light in the early morning. When that light signal is weak or absent, as it is for most adults over 50 who wake up in darkened rooms, check their phones, and move through indoor environments until midday, the cortisol awakening response misfires. And a misfired cortisol awakening response does not just make you groggy. According to a 2022 study from the University of Colorado Boulder published in Current Biology, it dysregulates the expression of clock genes, specifically BML1 and PER2, which are now understood to function as tumor suppressor mechanisms in breast, colon, and pancreatic tissue. Adults with disrupted clock gene expression showed a 44% reduction in natural tumor suppressor activity compared to those with normal circadian profiles. The intervention is so simple it almost sounds implausible. 10 minutes of outdoor light exposure within the first 30 minutes of waking, no sunglasses, no glass window in between, direct outdoor light on your eyes and skin, was shown in a 2023 trial from the Salk Institute to normalize cortisol awakening response in adults aged 55 to 72 within 14 days. 14 days to begin restoring a tumor suppressor mechanism. My patient Rosa, 59 years old, a writer who worked from home and rarely went outside before noon, had some of the most disrupted cortisol rhythm patterns I have seen in a non-shift worker. After 6 weeks of morning light exposure, her salivary cortisol profile normalized completely, and her follow-up inflammatory panel showed a 28% reduction in NF-κB pathway markers, the same inflammatory pathway that promotes cancer cell survival. She described the change in her energy, mental clarity, and sleep depth as nothing short of transformative. But none of what I have shared yet touches the mechanism that I consider the most underestimated cancer accelerator in adults over 50. It is not a food. It is not a toxin. It is not a pathogen. It is something your body produces itself, in excess, silently, for years before any symptom appears. I am talking about insulin resistance, specifically its effect on a protein called mTOR, mammalian target of rapamycin. mTOR is a master regulator of cell growth. When it is properly calibrated, it promotes healthy cellular repair and regeneration. When it is chronically overactivated, which is exactly what happens in states of insulin resistance, it becomes one of the most powerful drivers of cancer cell proliferation known to biology. A 2023 meta-analysis from the Harvard T.H. Chan School of Public Health, published in JAMA Internal Medicine, reviewed data from 29 prospective cohort studies totaling over 1.8 million adults, and found that adults with elevated fasting insulin, even within ranges most physicians consider borderline rather than diabetic, had a 67% higher risk of pancreatic cancer, a 58% higher risk of endometrial cancer, and a 41% higher risk of liver cancer compared to adults with optimal fasting insulin levels. 67%. For a condition that the majority of affected adults do not even know they have. The mechanism is specific. Chronically elevated insulin drives mTOR into a state of continuous activation. Continuously activated mTOR suppresses a process called selective autophagy, the cellular garbage collection system that identifies and destroys pre-malignant cells before they can replicate. This is your body's most fundamental internal cancer prevention mechanism, and insulin resistance is quietly dismantling it in millions of adults over 50 right now. The intervention with the strongest evidence base for reducing fasting insulin without medication is a combination of two things: a consistent overnight eating pause of at least 12 hours and a 10-minute walk taken within 30 minutes after your largest meal of the day. A 2022 randomized trial from the University of Alabama, Birmingham, published in Cell Metabolism, showed that these two behaviors combined, practiced consistently for 12 weeks in adults aged 55 to 70, reduced fasting insulin by an average of 29%, reduced mTOR overactivation markers by 34%, and measurably improved autophagy gene expression compared to controls. No caloric restriction, no specific diet, no medication, just two behavioral anchors practiced consistently. My patient James, 67 years old, a former sales executive with a fasting glucose of 101 and a fasting insulin of 18 microunits per milliliter, which most standard labs would flag as borderline but acceptable, implemented these two changes. 12 weeks later, his fasting insulin had dropped to 9. His follow-up PET scan, taken 6 months later as part of an ongoing cancer surveillance protocol given his family history, was described by his radiologist as remarkably clean for his age. Now, I want to bring everything together because the most important thing I can leave you with today is not any single habit in isolation. It is the understanding that your body is not a collection of separate systems. It is one integrated biological environment, and that environment is either trending toward disease or away from it based on the daily inputs you give it. The gut microbiome diversity we discussed directly influences the inflammatory baseline that either supports or undermines your circadian clock gene function. Your clock gene function directly regulates the cortisol rhythm that determines how deeply and how restoratively you sleep. The quality of your sleep determines how efficiently your body suppresses mTOR overactivation overnight. And mTOR regulation is the gatekeeper of autophagy, the entire cellular self-cleaning process that is your deepest protection against malignant cell accumulation. These are not 5 separate habits. They are 5 entry points into the same biological system, and every one of them is accessible to you right now, regardless of your age, your current health status, your genetics, or your history. I have watched patients in their early 70s with precancerous findings, elevated inflammatory markers, and a genetic predisposition turn every one of those indicators around through targeted, consistent, science-backed lifestyle changes. Not through perfection, not through deprivation. Through understanding, because when you understand the mechanism, the behavior stops feeling like discipline and starts feeling like logic. I want to ask you one final question, and I genuinely want your answer in the comments. Of everything I have shared today, what is the one thing that surprised you most? And what is the one thing you are going to do differently starting tomorrow? Because the research is unambiguous on one point. The single strongest predictor of whether lifestyle interventions improve biological cancer risk markers is not the intervention itself. It is consistency of implementation, and consistency begins with a single decision made on a single day. That day can be today. If this conversation gave you something valuable, I would ask you to do 2 things. Share this with one person over 50 in your life who deserves this information, and subscribe so you are here when I release the next piece of this series, because what I am covering next goes even deeper into the emerging science of cancer prevention, and it is information that most people will not encounter anywhere else. Take care of yourself. The biology is on your side when you give it the conditions it needs to protect you.